The opening shots of the war painted a picture of absolute, almost unimaginable Japanese naval dominance in the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy, or IJN, had spent decades perfecting their strategies and ships, believing their sailors and their vessels were superior to any Western counterpart. Their doctrine emphasized the decisive fleet action, aiming to cripple the enemy in a single, overwhelming engagement. This focus led to a profound overconfidence, particularly regarding the logistical support the Americans would require to fight a protracted war across the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. Japanese naval planning factored in the concept of attrition, anticipating that battle damage would permanently remove a large percentage of the American fleet from the war for years. They calculated the time required for major repairs at American shipyards based on their own, more constrained industrial capacity and traditional, meticulous methods, which demanded long, painstaking hours. Japanese admirals, having studied the pre-war American industrial base, believed they understood the rate at which the U.S. could recover from a major blow. This calculation was one of their most significant, and ultimately fatal, misjudgments of the entire conflict. The Japanese naval logistics system was centralized and relatively slow, prioritizing the quality and finish of the repair over the speed of return to service. They often viewed American industrial practices as crude or rushed, assuming that any quick fix would inevitably fail in battle. This inherent cultural and logistical difference led them to dismiss the notion of rapid, extensive wartime repairs being possible for a navy operating thousands of miles from its mainland bases. The early victories only cemented this view, leading to an almost casual dismissal of the enemy's ability to sustain a continuous and growing operational tempo. They watched the wreckage at Pearl Harbor and concluded, with misplaced certainty, that the Americans would take a debilitating amount of time to return even a fraction of that lost firepower. This profound underestimation of American logistics and industrial might would become a recurring and catastrophic theme for the IJN throughout the entire war. Their mockery of the American repair yards was rooted in a fundamental failure to grasp the scale, redundancy, and adaptability of the American industrial machine, a machine that was about to be unleashed in an unprecedented fury. December 7, 1941, was a day of unparalleled catastrophe for the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack, swift and devastating, managed to sink or damage 18 American ships, including the core of the Pacific Fleet's battle line, 8 battleships. For the Japanese High Command, this blow represented the successful execution of their war plan to buy critical time for expansion into Southeast Asia. Their intelligence estimated the battleships would be out of commission for 6 months to over a year, with some losses being considered permanent. The immediate aftermath was a scene of smoke, sunken hulls, and despair, seemingly confirming every one of the Japanese admiral's assumptions. The task of salvage and repair seemed insurmountable, a logistical quagmire that would bog down American efforts for years. However, even as the smoke cleared, the resilience of the American naval and industrial spirit began to assert itself in the wreckage. It was immediately recognized that the war would be won not just by fighting on the sea, but by working in the yards. The true strength of the American fleet was not just the ships themselves, but the immense, decentralized, and highly redundant repair facilities that stretched from the west coast to Hawaii. Unlike the Japanese, whose facilities were limited and often closer to the home islands, the American system was built for mass production and rapid turnaround. The focus shifted from traditional, peacetime perfection to wartime practicality. What is the minimum required to get the ship operational and back into the fight? This pragmatism was a cultural shift, prioritizing speed and volume over meticulous finish, a concept utterly alien to the IJN's mindset. The Navy leveraged the enormous civilian industrial capacity, drafting thousands of skilled tradesmen and women into the massive effort. This pooling of national resources was something the Japanese, with their smaller, less adaptable industrial base, simply could not replicate or even fully comprehend. The Pearl Harbor disaster, therefore, did not lead to a prolonged period of American naval inactivity as the Japanese hoped, but instead served as the single greatest catalyst for an industrial mobilization the world had never witnessed. It transformed the initial disaster into a hidden strength, as the damaged ships were immediately assessed for their viability and assigned a rapid schedule for their impossible resurrection. The entire Japanese naval strategy for the early war was predicated on a calculation of time. They believed they possessed a finite window, perhaps 6 to 12 months, to conquer and fortify their newly seized perimeter before the rebuilt American fleet could challenge them effectively. This belief was heavily informed by their detailed, though ultimately flawed, analysis of American ship repair timelines. They knew that a capital ship, even under wartime pressure, conventionally required many months, if not a year or more, for a complete hull or machinery replacement. Reports of damage to ships like the USS Nevada and the USS California were read with satisfaction in Tokyo, confirming their assessment of a prolonged American absence. Their own repair facilities, while technically proficient, were not designed for the volume and speed of sustained combat damage, relying on a system where ships were out of action for extended periods. This rigid adherence to a conventional timeline blinded them to the revolutionary methods the Americans were about to employ. Japanese admirals held a disdain for what they perceived as the mass-produced quality of American naval construction, favoring the bespoke, highly skilled craftsmanship of their own shipbuilding. They mistakenly believed that the complexity of modern warships made shortcuts in repair functionally impossible without compromising the vessel's integrity in the next engagement. The concept of a patch job that would hold up under fire was a form of professional heresy to them, leading to an overconfident pronouncement that the damaged ships were essentially permanent losses. This arrogant calculation failed to account for the American ability to cannibalize parts, use prefabricated modular sections, and simply throw overwhelming manpower at a problem until it yielded. The IJN's estimates of American capability were not based on potential, but on their own operational limits, projecting their weaknesses onto their enemy. They did not foresee the complete industrial and labor dedication that would treat the repair of a major warship as an emergency national priority, operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This miscalculation of the logistical and repair timeline became a critical strategic error, one that allowed the American fleet to return to the fight far sooner than anticipated, shrinking the IJN's vital time window to a dangerous minimum. The Japanese intelligence community delivered reports on the American repair efforts which were often met with skepticism or outright derision by senior admirals. The idea that a battleship severely damaged at Pearl Harbor could be back at sea in a few months seemed to defy the fundamental laws of naval engineering as they knew them. These officers, steeped in the traditions of meticulous and methodical shipbuilding, literally scoffed at the reported speed of the American shipyards. They viewed the hasty American methods as a sign of desperation and incompetence, rather than a breakthrough in logistical warfare. The phrase, "they are only fit for a one-way trip," was likely a sentiment expressed in private planning sessions, a dismissal of the structural integrity of the quickly repaired vessels. This derision was a direct result of the Japanese Navy's inability to match the sheer, overwhelming output of the American industrial sector. The IJN system was strained, relying on a relatively small number of highly skilled workers and a centralized network of shipyards that were soon targets for Allied attack. Consequently, any damage they sustained meant a near-permanent loss of combat power, and they naturally assumed the same constraint applied to their enemy. Their own ships, when damaged, often required lengthy and intricate repairs, reflecting a national industrial base that was far less elastic than that of the United States. This mockery of the American timeline was a psychological shield, an attempt to rationalize their own limited capabilities by belittling the enemy's extraordinary ones. It was a classic military blunder, underestimating the enemy's resourcefulness and capacity for adaptation under duress. The Japanese failed to understand the wartime concept of good enough for the fight, a principle that propelled damaged American vessels back into the operational theater with functional, if not cosmetically perfect, repairs. Every day they believed the American ships were still in dry dock was a day they felt they were winning the logistical war, a false comfort that masked the reality unfolding thousands of miles away. This smug dismissal of the repair yard set the stage for the profound shock that would come when supposedly crippled American vessels suddenly reappeared, fully operational, where they should not have been. While the Japanese mocked and waited, the United States was already deep into the process of a complete industrial transformation. The war effort became the single unifying purpose of the American economy, pivoting from consumer goods to military production with breathtaking speed and scale. Shipyards, stretching from the East Coast to the Gulf and especially on the Pacific seaboard, expanded their operations to an unimaginable degree, becoming true 24-hour factories of war. The mobilization involved not only the Navy's repair facilities but also private contractors and former civilian manufacturing plants, all pressed into service. Skilled workers, including a massive influx of women who became known as Rosie the Riveter, poured into the yards, working 3 shifts a day under powerful floodlights that never dimmed. The government implemented standardized, interchangeable parts across many ship classes, a key innovation that drastically streamlined the repair process. If a damaged section could not be repaired quickly, an entirely new, prefabricated module was simply inserted in its place, a practice that horrified the traditionalists. This modular construction method, borrowed from Henry Kaiser's phenomenal Liberty ship program, was the secret weapon of the American repair effort. The logistical coordination required to move these massive components and millions of tons of raw materials was a feat of bureaucratic and engineering genius. A complex web of railroads, trucks, and specialized transport ships ensured a constant, relentless flow of steel, welding rods, and machinery to every major repair port. The sheer scale of manpower, resources, and continuous labor applied to the task overwhelmed traditional repair timelines. Ships that would have taken a year to repair in peacetime were returned to service in a matter of weeks, sometimes days, a logistical miracle. This relentless, almost manic, pace was the true force multiplier for the American war effort, turning a fleet that suffered a crippling initial blow into one that never truly lacked combat-ready ships. The industrial Leviathan had awakened, and its appetite for production and repair was one of the single most decisive factors in the ultimate outcome of the Pacific War. The revolutionary principle driving American repair was the 24-hour shipyard concept, which rejected the traditional work cycle entirely. This was not simply a matter of adding a night shift, it was a total cultural commitment to continuous, non-stop problem-solving and labor execution. The process began the moment a damaged ship arrived, with crews boarding even before it was fully secured in dry dock to begin immediate assessment and cleaning. A flywheel effect was achieved where one shift would set up the work, the next would execute the heavy tasks, and the third would handle inspection and finishing, maintaining constant momentum. Crucially, the decision-making process was decentralized and rapid, granting shipyard commanders and even individual foremen considerable authority to make on-the-spot executive calls to save time. Bureaucracy was slashed, and a pragmatic attitude of "get it done now, perfect it later" replaced peacetime perfectionism. Welding and structural repair became an art of aggressive efficiency, focusing on essential seaworthiness and combat functionality over cosmetic appearance. Holes in the hull were patched with massive steel plates that looked crude but were structurally sound, a sight that often drew the mockery of captured Japanese officers. The use of mobile repair tenders and floating dry docks also extended the 24-hour shipyard capability into forward areas, meaning ships didn't have to limp all the way back to the continental US for every major fix. This forward-deployed repair capacity was another logistical nightmare the Japanese failed to anticipate or counter, allowing the American fleet to remain closer to the action. The psychological impact on the sailors was immense, as they saw their damaged vessels return to the line with incredible speed, fostering a belief in the relentless support of the home front. The entire operation was a masterful blend of mass labor, standardized engineering, and an unshakable wartime resolve, all working together against the ticking clock of Imperial Japanese expansion. It was this commitment to ceaseless activity that transformed the logistical liability of battle damage into a recoverable, and often temporary, setback for the United States Navy. The story of the USS Yorktown at the Battle of the Coral Sea serves as the definitive illustration of the 24-hour shipyard in action. In the first major clash between aircraft carriers, the Yorktown suffered severe damage from a Japanese air attack, including a bomb that ripped through her flight deck and multiple near misses. Initial assessments suggested she would require several months of repair in a major West Coast yard to be made fully combat-ready again. However, the impending Battle of Midway, a crucial showdown for the Pacific, made a conventional repair timeline impossible and unacceptable to Admiral Chester Nimitz. The crippled carrier limped back to Pearl Harbor, arriving on May 27, 1942, just days before the expected Japanese attack on Midway Atoll. Nimitz issued an impossible order: make the Yorktown seaworthy and operational in 72 hours, a timeline naval engineers deemed ludicrous for the extent of her damage. A massive civilian and Navy workforce, numbering over 1,400 men, swarmed the carrier, working around the clock in shifts so intense that they often slept near their workstations. They repaired the flight deck, patched a massive underwater hole, replaced damaged sections of her electrical systems, and restored her damaged elevators. Many of the repairs were temporary fixes, a testament to the good enough wartime philosophy, but they were structurally sound and functional for the task ahead. In less than 3 days, the Yorktown was back at sea, having been declared battle-ready by the sheer force of industrial will, confounding all traditional naval repair expectations. She arrived at Midway just in time, a phantom ship that the Japanese believed was either sunk or still languishing in dry dock, a classic case of their flawed intelligence. Though the Yorktown was tragically lost at Midway, her 3-day resurrection had a disproportionate impact, providing the crucial fourth carrier needed to secure the decisive American victory. Her rapid return became a symbol of American industrial grit and the logistical nightmare the Japanese were just beginning to realize they faced. The true psychological turning point came when the first of the supposedly crippled American ships reappeared on the front lines. Japanese intelligence, based on their own repair models, had confidently written these vessels off the immediate order of battle. When a ship, known to have been severely damaged or even declared sunk, suddenly participated in an engagement, it sent ripples of confusion and doubt through the IJN High Command. The first major shock involved ships from Pearl Harbor that were returned to action far sooner than the admirals had calculated. This phenomenon was so unexpected that initial Japanese reports often dismissed the sightings as misidentification or a cruel trick of intelligence. The reality, however, was that the logistical timetable of the Pacific War was being dictated not by the speed of the ships in battle, but by the miraculous speed of the workers in the yards. These shock appearances began to undermine the confidence of Japanese officers in their own strategic assessments, injecting a debilitating element of uncertainty into their planning. They had based their war on a finite resource, time, and watching the enemy recover their losses at a rate they could not match meant that the resource was rapidly running out. For the Japanese, a damaged ship was a near-permanent loss, while for the Americans, it was merely a temporary diversion to a repair dock. This stark contrast meant the attrition warfare the Japanese had planned on was now working against them, with American losses being rapidly replaced and repaired while theirs were not. The reappearance of the American vessels was not just a tactical problem, it was a spiritual defeat for the Japanese belief in their own calculated superiority. It forced them to confront the reality that their pre-war estimation of American industrial capacity was catastrophically wrong. That ships that shouldn't have returned became legendary among the Americans and a source of deep, unsettling dread among the Japanese, symbolizing the vast, unmatchable resources of their enemy. The technological heart of the American repair revolution lay in the widespread use of prefabrication and standardization. This approach was a complete departure from the labor-intensive, custom-built methods historically favored by shipwrights around the world. Instead of meticulously repairing a damaged section of a hull on the ship itself, American yards were able to pre-build massive, multi-ton sections off-site. These prefabricated units, complete with plumbing, wiring, and structural supports, were constructed in parallel while the damaged ship was still in transit or preliminary dry dock. Upon arrival, massive floating cranes would simply cut out the ruined section of the ship's hull or superstructure and drop the new module into place. The technique dramatically reduced the time a multi-million-dollar warship occupied a valuable dry dock, the primary bottleneck in the repair process. It meant that highly specialized, detailed work could be performed in various manufacturing plants across the country, freeing up the shipyards for critical assembly and welding. This industrial modularity was a direct extension of American mass production techniques, applying the assembly line method to the incredibly complex task of repairing a warship. The resulting repairs, though sometimes appearing visibly patched, were structurally robust and fully capable of withstanding the rigors of naval combat. This standardized approach also made the training of the enormous influx of new shipyard workers much faster and more efficient. A worker only needed to be proficient in one specific task on a standardized module, rather than a master of all aspects of shipbuilding. The ability to essentially swap out damaged components like car parts was a force multiplier that the Japanese Navy could not match, lacking the requisite industrial scale and standardization. This fabrication of a fleet, both new and newly repaired, ensured a relentless and overwhelming numerical superiority for the American war effort throughout the entire Pacific campaign. In stark contrast to the American industrial machine, the Japanese logistical system was burdened by a series of critical and self-imposed limitations. The IJN's repair facilities were generally smaller, fewer in number, and clustered primarily around the home islands, requiring damaged ships to travel vast distances. This centralization meant that a ship crippled near Guadalcanal had to limp thousands of miles through hostile waters to receive comprehensive repair, often taking weeks and risking further attack. Furthermore, the Japanese industrial base lacked the necessary redundancy and access to raw materials, especially after the Allied submarine campaign began to cripple their shipping lanes. Every repair was a painstaking process, often involving limited tools and a scarcity of vital replacement parts, slowing the work to a crawl. Unlike the American system of interchangeable, prefabricated modules, Japanese repairs were more ad hoc and custom-fitted, demanding more highly skilled labor and more time in the dry dock. The Japanese commitment to meticulous craftsmanship, a source of pride in peacetime, became a severe liability in the brutal, time-critical environment of total war. There was a chronic shortage of the necessary heavy lifting equipment and modern welding technology that were commonplace in American yards. The logistical bottleneck became so severe that many damaged Japanese warships were effectively cannibalized for parts on remote islands or relegated to permanent tender duty. As the war progressed, the Japanese were simply unable to repair and return ships to the line faster than the Americans could sink them or faster than the Americans could build new ones. Their logistics were built for a short, decisive conflict, failing entirely to pivot to the prolonged, industrial war of attrition that the Americans were perfectly suited to fight. This failure of logistics, a lack of forward repair bases and industrial scale, guaranteed that every Japanese loss was magnified, while every American loss was a temporary setback. The rapid return of American warships had a devastating cumulative effect known as an unsustainable operational tempo. Operational tempo refers to the speed and frequency with which a fleet can execute missions, fight battles, and remain continuously active in the theater of war. The ability of U.S. yards to perform miracle repairs meant that the American fleet was always numerically stronger than the Japanese believed it to be. This forced the IJN to commit their finite resources to battle prematurely or under unfavorable conditions, always reacting to an enemy who seemed to appear out of thin air. For the Japanese sailors, the psychological strain was immense, as they fought an enemy who never seemed to deplete their resources or their battle-ready ships. The Admirals' battle plans were continually undermined by the sudden presence of ships they had expected to be unavailable for months. This speed of repair was arguably a greater force multiplier than any single new ship or technological advantage, guaranteeing an ever-increasing flow of combat power. American carriers and cruisers, hastily patched and sent back out, could withstand one more battle, providing the crucial numerical edge in engagements like Midway and Guadalcanal. The U.S. Navy could afford to take calculated risks in battle, knowing that a damaged ship was likely recoverable, a luxury the IJN increasingly did not possess. The continuous presence of the American fleet kept the pressure on Japanese holdings, denying them the time to consolidate and fortify their massive island perimeter. This relentless pace forced the Japanese to continually expend their most valuable resources, trained pilots and experienced sailors, without any corresponding chance for rest and resupply. The mockery of time had turned into a terrifying reality. American industrial speed was systematically dismantling the entire foundation of the Imperial Japanese Navy's war strategy. The true heroes of the ships that shouldn't have returned narrative were not just the fighting sailors, but the unseen, tireless workers in the massive repair yards. These civilians, both men and women, performed feats of engineering and logistics under immense pressure and complete anonymity. They were welders, crane operators, machinists, engineers, and thousands of support staff who embraced the 24-hour cycle of wartime production. Their contribution fundamentally redefined naval warfare, proving that logistical speed could be as decisive as firepower or tactical genius. The dedication of these workers, often sacrificing their own health and sleep, translated directly into saved lives and operational victories thousands of miles away. The speed with which they could repair and rearm a crippled vessel provided a moral and psychological boost to the sailors fighting on the front lines. Their innovation in modular construction and standardization left a permanent mark on the practice of both naval shipbuilding and repair, influencing post-war industrial methods. The incredible output of the American shipyards remains a testament to the power of a unified national purpose and a flexible, adaptable industrial base. It was the ultimate, irrefutable answer to the initial mockery and arrogance of the Japanese admirals. They had underestimated the American capacity for resilience, ingenuity, and sheer industrial volume, focusing on the quality of the initial strike rather than the quality of the counterpunch. The sight of a patched, scarred, but fully operational American warship steaming back to battle was the most profound and humbling defeat the Japanese High Command would ever witness. The silent, unwritten legacy of the 24-hour shipyard is that in a war of attrition, the nation that can repair faster than its enemy can destroy will inevitably prevail.